She thought she had found freedom. But the truth is, freedom was the very first thing he would take away. Maya Brooks grew up believing that life was a game of survival. Bills had to be paid, rent was always due, and every month felt like a calculation between what you needed and what you could live without. She told herself early on that she would never be stuck in that cycle forever. Some people accept it. She never would. Her definition of freedom wasn't complicated, it was choice. The choice of where to wake up, where to travel, what to buy, how to spend a day without asking permission from a boss or a landlord or even a clock. To Maya, wealth wasn't just about money, it was about power. And power meant never having to be trapped again. That dream was what set the stage for the story you're about to hear. A story not about love, but about control. Not about luxury, but about a cage built out of diamonds and steel. April 17, 2021. New York City. In the official record, it was just another spring evening. But for those who knew Maya, or thought they did, it was the night that her name became forever linked to a man whose reputation was far larger than the walls of his penthouse apartment. His name, Victor Hale. On the surface, he was everything Maya believed she wanted. Wealthy, powerful, untouchable. But behind the image was something far more dangerous. Voiceover, Maya didn't marry him for love. She married him for the promise of freedom. What she didn't know was that freedom would be the first thing Victor Hale stripped away. The story begins quietly. A young woman leaving Atlanta, chasing more than her paycheck. A man who had already built an empire, hidden behind layers of assistants and lawyers and security guards. Their paths crossing in the glare of Las Vegas, in a casino built to lure dreamers and break them just as fast. For Victor, the casino was a playground. For Maya, it was a stage. Working there meant she was finally in proximity to the kind of life she had always imagined. The neon lights, the designer dresses, the men who could spend in an hour what her family had never seen in a year. She noticed them, and some of them noticed her. And that's where Victor Hale comes in. Witnesses would later describe him as calm, calculated, the kind of man who didn't need to prove anything. He wasn't loud. He wasn't flashy. His power was quieter than that, quieter and more dangerous. When he looked at someone, it wasn't curiosity. It was a decision. The first time he saw Maya, he didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just held her gaze a moment too long. Later, he asked her name. She gave it. And he told her simply, "I'll remember it." And he did. From that night forward, their paths kept crossing. Coincidence, maybe, but more likely, by design. Voiceover tone shifts. She was young. Ambitious. Drawn to a life she thought meant safety. He was older. Wealthy. A man whose money bought silence, obedience, and, if he wanted it, people. When Maya agreed to his attention, she thought she was stepping into a story she had written for herself. The one where she escaped Atlanta forever, where she finally lived the life she promised herself as a teenager. But there's a reason we start the story not with her rise, but with her fall. Because Maya Brooks's marriage to Victor Hale was not the beginning of her freedom, it was the beginning of her captivity. April 17, 2021. The official record shows her name connected to his for the first time in public reports. The tabloids framed it as a whirlwind romance, a rags-to-riches fantasy. But for those who knew her back in Georgia, it looked different. Her old friends noticed the way her laughter came less often, the way her social media shifted from genuine moments to carefully staged images. A curated life, with fewer words and more pictures. Behind the photos of yachts and champagne glasses, something was already changing. Slowly at first. Then all at once. Voiceover, she had always wanted more. But in Victor's world, more came with a price. And soon, that price would be everything she thought she still controlled. The hook of this story isn't about a wedding or an Instagram account full of perfect pictures. It's about the contrast, the before and the after. Before Victor Hale, Maya was chasing a dream. After him, she was living a nightmare. Every survivor will tell you that control doesn't always arrive with a fist or a threat. Sometimes it arrives disguised as care, as security, as love. And that's exactly how Victor Hale operated. At first, he promised her a life without worry. He gave her a new phone, explaining it was safer. He hired her a personal assistant, explaining it was for convenience. He kept her close, explaining it was for her own good. Each explanation sounded protective. Each one stripped something away. By the time Maya noticed how far she had drifted from the life she thought she'd chosen, the walls were already in place. Every true crime story begins long before the headlines. To understand Maya Brooks and the choices that brought her to Victor Hale's world, we need to step back. Back to Atlanta, Georgia. Back to a childhood that taught her two lessons: survival was mandatory, and money could rewrite the rules. Maya grew up on the south side of Atlanta in a neighborhood that carried more stories of struggle than success. Her mother worked double shifts at a nursing home, while her father drifted in and out of the picture. The apartment they lived in was small, with peeling paint and a heater that broke every winter. Yet, inside those walls, Maya began shaping her idea of the life she wanted. As a teenager, she watched classmates brag about vacations she had never taken, cars their parents bought for them, and houses big enough for hallways that echoed. She promised herself she would never accept a life of just scraping by. For her, the American dream wasn't about stability, it was about escape. Her friends noticed it early. The way her eyes followed expensive cars that rolled through stoplights, the way her voice softened when she mentioned wealthy customers at the diner where she worked part-time. Some of them warned her. Chasing money without love was dangerous. But Maya brushed them off. She didn't see it as chasing money. She saw it as chasing freedom. While Maya was shaping her dreams in Atlanta, another man was already living his. Victor Hale's name was one that appeared in Forbes lists, whispered at Wall Street cocktail parties, and respected in boardrooms. He was in his early 50s, tall, silver streaks in his dark hair, and a demeanor that never cracked. His power wasn't loud. It was silent, and that silence made people lean in. Born in Boston, the son of a banker, Victor had grown up in a world of privilege. But privilege alone hadn't built his empire. He had a gift for leverage, financial, psychological, social. By the time Maya was finishing high school, Victor was already reshaping energy and tech portfolios, buying companies, breaking others apart, and expanding his empire. In Manhattan, he was seen as untouchable. No scandal had ever stuck to him, though there were whispers, rumors of women who entered his circle and vanished just as quickly. But whispers rarely made headlines, and Victor understood how to bury them. In contrast to Victor's empire, there was Evan Collins. Evan and Maya met in Atlanta when they were both barely 20. He was a mechanic, steady-handed, quiet, content with life's simple rhythms. Evan's world was defined by torque wrenches, car lifts, and late nights with classic rock humming from an old radio. He loved Maya in the uncomplicated way of a man who found joy in routine. A small house in the suburbs, a steady paycheck, maybe a family one day, that was his vision. At first, Maya tried to believe she could be satisfied with that life. Evan was kind, dependable, and safe. But safe didn't quiet the restlessness in her. As she lay awake at night beside him, she counted the miles between her reality and her dreams. She thought she could wait it out, stay with Evan until something better came along. She thought she was in control. But control is fragile. And sooner or later, it slips away. By her mid-20s, Maya made her move. Las Vegas promised more than Atlanta ever could. Neon lights, endless energy, money moving in every direction. She landed a job at one of the most exclusive casinos on the Strip. To the tourists, it was a place of chance. To Maya, it was opportunity. Every night she watched high rollers toss chips onto tables like pocket change. She studied them, their watches, their suits, the way they carried themselves. She wanted in. And that's when she met Victor Hale. He wasn't like the other men she had watched. He didn't need to show off. He didn't shout. He didn't try to impress. His presence was enough. When his eyes locked on hers, it wasn't curiosity. It was calculation. For Victor, people were pieces on a board. And that night, Maya became one of them. Voice over tone, by the time Victor Hale entered her life, Maya Brooks had already made her choice. She wasn't chasing love. She was chasing more. And Victor was the kind of man who could give it to her, at a price she could not yet see. But what about the people watching from the outside? Maya's mother, Denise, noticed the change in her daughter from the moment the Instagram post shifted. At first, it was small, designer handbags, champagne glasses, selfies in hotel rooms. Then came the yachts, the private jets, the engagement rings so large it caught every angle of the sun. To friends back in Atlanta, it looked like she had won. She had escaped. But Denise felt something different. Behind the smile, she saw the tension in Maya's eyes. Behind the glamorous captions, she sensed distance. When she visited Maya in New York, she found herself standing in rooms too large, too silent, too controlled. Denise was uneasy, though she couldn't yet say why. Evan Collins, meanwhile, had built a different life. By the time Maya appeared in magazines alongside Victor, Evan was running his own small auto shop. He didn't talk about her often, but when her name came up, he grew quiet. He told himself he was relieved. Relieved he hadn't followed her into a life that would have asked him to be someone he wasn't. But late at night, when the shop was closed and the tools were put away, he still thought about her. He wondered if walking away had been respect, or if it had been fear. By the end of 2020, the three threads of this story were in place. Maya Brooks, the dreamer, restless, ambitious, willing to risk love for freedom. Victor Hale, the tycoon, controlled, powerful, and dangerous in ways not easily seen. Evan Collins, the steady one, the quiet past that represented a life Maya no longer wanted, but perhaps needed more than she realized. Together, they formed the triangle that defines this story. Voiceover closing part 2, every crime story has its cast. The victim, the perpetrator, the witnesses left behind. But in Maya's case, the lines were blurred. Was she a victim of her own ambition, or of a man who saw ambition as weakness to exploit? To answer that, we need to see what happened next. Every story of downfall begins with a choice. For Maya Brooks, that choice was to leave Atlanta. By 2019, she had grown restless. Atlanta had given her roots, but roots felt like chains. She worked part-time jobs, diners, retail counters, even a few temp office gigs, but each paycheck felt like a reminder that she was still trapped. Her friends were getting married, buying houses in suburbs, celebrating promotions that still left them stressed about bills. To Maya, all of that looked like a quieter version of the same prison. So when a former coworker mentioned a connection in Las Vegas, she didn't hesitate. The offer was a hostess position at one of the Strip's most exclusive casinos. It wasn't glamorous on paper, serving champagne, greeting high rollers, keeping the atmosphere polished. But in her mind, it was proximity. Proximity to wealth, proximity to power, proximity to the kind of men who didn't worry about money because they owned the tables where it was lost. She boarded a one-way flight to Nevada with 2 suitcases and a heart full of determination. Las Vegas is a city built to overwhelm the senses. Neon signs flicker without pause, music leaks from every doorway, and the smell of perfume and cigarette smoke clings to the air. Maya felt the rush immediately. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the outsider looking in. She was inside the palace, if only at the edges. Her job was straightforward: smile, serve, never forget a face. The casino itself was a world apart from the dingy bars or small diners back home. Golden chandeliers dripped from the ceiling. Dealers shuffled cards with mechanical precision. Waitresses in sleek dresses glided between tables, balancing trays of champagne flutes. Everything was polished to hide the desperation that fueled it. Maya understood her role quickly. She wasn't just serving drinks, she was part of the illusion. To the gamblers, she represented possibility. To management, she represented presentation. But to herself, she represented a future waiting to be claimed. And then, one night, Victor Hale walked in. It wasn't his wealth that stood out at first. In Las Vegas, wealth was everywhere. Flashy watches, designer suits, private security, none of that was rare. What made Victor different was the stillness. While others shouted across tables or raised glasses to toast their winnings, Victor simply observed. He was in his early 50s, his dark hair streaked with silver, his posture relaxed but deliberate. When his eyes moved across the room, people followed without knowing why. Maya noticed him, of course. Everyone did. But what startled her was that he noticed her back. Their first interaction was brief. She passed by with a tray of champagne, and his gaze held hers a moment too long. He didn't smile. He didn't flirt. He simply said, "I'll remember your name." And he did. The next evening, he returned. This time, he stayed longer. By the end of the week, he knew her schedule. Maya didn't need convincing to talk to him. She had been waiting for someone like Victor her entire life. At first, his gestures seemed simple. A generous tip. A seat at his table, even if she wasn't working his section. Questions about her background, not too invasive, but just enough to suggest interest. For Maya, it was intoxicating. This wasn't some small-time gambler chasing a thrill. This was a man whose money didn't waver, whose presence commanded attention, whose silence felt heavier than most men's words. Soon, their conversations left the casino. Dinner in private restaurants. Drives down the strip in cars that roared like beasts. Nights in penthouse suites where the curtains framed city lights instead of broken blinds. Voice-over tone lowers, Maya believed she had stepped into the life she always wanted. And in many ways, she had. But what she didn't see, what she couldn't see, was that every gift, every invitation, every private evening was part of something larger. Victor Hale wasn't just letting her into his world. He was pulling her into his control. By the spring of 2020, Maya's social media had transformed. Her followers, friends from Atlanta, old coworkers, saw only the highlights. Champagne glasses on yachts. Designer handbags draped over chairs. Front row seats at concerts. A diamond bracelet catching the sun. The comments were endless. "You made it. So proud of you. Goals." But what they didn't see was how carefully curated those images were. What they didn't see was how quickly her private life was shifting. Calls from her mother went unanswered for days. Evan's name, once a quiet ghost on her phone, was now blocked entirely. Even when she wanted to check in with old friends, Victor reminded her she was busy. "You don't need them," he said once, his voice calm, not unkind, but final. "You have me now." The turning point came with the ring. It wasn't a proposal so much as a declaration. A stone so large it caught light from every angle, presented not with a question but with a certainty, "You belong in my world." Maya said yes instantly. In her mind, it was the finish line. She had arrived. The cautious voices from Atlanta, friends, family, Evan, were now ghosts. The wedding was private, elegant, and suffocating. Held in New York, with only select guests, it was more transaction than celebration. Victor was flawless in presentation, his vows rehearsed, his control absolute. When the rings were exchanged, his grip lingered a second too long. His eyes didn't hold affection, they held warning. Maya smiled for the cameras, convinced it was cultural tradition, a small quirk of a powerful man. But deep inside, something tightened. She ignored it. She had to. For a short time after the wedding, Maya Brooks convinced herself she had finally arrived. The photos were flawless, the lifestyle enviable, and the ring on her hand heavy with promise. Friends back in Atlanta flooded her social media with comments, "So proud of you. Living the dream." They believed the images. So did Maya, at least for a while. But life with Victor Hale changed quietly, and then all at once. It began with the phone. One morning, as she scrolled through messages from her mother and friends, Victor appeared in the doorway of their Manhattan penthouse suite. His tone was calm, but final. "From now on, use this one. It's safer." He placed a sleek, expensive phone into her hand. "Your number is now private. Only the people I approve can contact you." At first, Maya told herself it was security. Victor was a man of power. It made sense he'd want to shield her from strangers. But when she reached for her old phone, it was already gone. Soon, her social media went silent. The curated gallery of designer handbags and champagne glasses froze in place, no longer updated. Her friends called less often, then not at all. Even her mother struggled to reach her, every call intercepted by Victor's assistant. The assistant's name was Rana. Efficient, polite, always nearby. At first, Maya thought of her as a helper. Someone who kept schedules, handled errands, shielded her from stress. But over time, she realized Rana wasn't there for her convenience, she was there for Victor's control. Rana reported everything, where Maya went, what she said, how she looked. Maya began to feel watched in her own home. Voiceover shifts lower, control doesn't always arrive in shouts or fists. Sometimes it arrives disguised as care, as protection, as love. That's how Victor Hale worked. He didn't need to raise his voice. He only needed to remove options, one by one, until Maya's world was smaller than the diamond ring she wore. The penthouse itself, once a palace, became a cage. Maya rarely left without Victor's approval. Invitations from acquaintances were declined on her behalf. Trips to visit her mother were postponed, then canceled altogether. Victor's justification was always the same: it's not safe. People want to take advantage of you. Out there, you're vulnerable. In here, you're protected. At first, she tried to believe him. She told herself this was the price of marrying someone powerful. But late at night, as she stared at the glittering skyline outside, unease crept in. One evening, she asked about visiting Atlanta. Victor's response was sharp, not in volume but in certainty. "That's behind you now. Focus on the life you have, not the one you left." His gaze lingered on her until she dropped the subject. Maya smiled for him, as she always did. But deep inside, a seed of doubt had taken root. By mid-2020, the changes were visible. Her laughter, once frequent, grew rare. Her posture shifted. She carried herself less like a woman who had conquered the world and more like someone navigating invisible tripwires. Her friends back home noticed the silence but assumed she was busy. Her mother worried but had no way to reach her. And Victor? He only tightened his grip. There were rules now. Rules about who she could speak to. Rules about what she could wear. Rules about when she was expected to be home, which was almost always. Each rule was wrapped in the language of care. "I don't want people misinterpreting you. That dress doesn't reflect your dignity. I just need to know where you are, it's safer." Maya obeyed, because what choice did she have? Voiceover builds tension. When power hides behind protection, it's harder to fight. When control looks like care, it's harder to see. And for Maya Brooks, the walls were closing in. Her body began to show the cost. Food lost its taste. Sleep slipped away. Headaches blurred her vision. She told herself it was stress, that it would pass, but deep down she knew it was the toll of living in a life that wasn't hers anymore. Even Rana, the assistant, began to notice. But her words were clipped, professional, never comforting. "Mr. Hale says rest. Mr. Hale says you'll feel better with time." Everything funneled back to Victor. The turning point came one night after a gala in New York. The event was opulent, filled with politicians, investors, and socialites. Maya smiled on cue, posed for photos, stood by Victor's side. But when she excused herself and slipped into a quiet hallway, she caught her reflection in a gilded mirror. The woman staring back was thinner, her eyes tired, her smile brittle. She barely recognized herself. At that moment, Victor appeared behind her. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply placed a hand on her shoulder and whispered, "Remember, you belong to me." The words were soft, but they landed like a verdict. For months, Maya Brooks lived inside Victor Hale's carefully constructed world. Every day followed the rhythm of his control, scheduled appearances, managed conversations, rules disguised as protection. From the outside, her life looked perfect. Inside, it was shrinking by the hour. But turning points rarely arrive with warning. They slip in quietly, a small moment that changes everything. For Maya, that moment happened far from New York, in a place where Victor believed his control was absolute. It was October of 2021. Washington, D.C. hosted one of Victor's favorite charity galas, an event designed less for goodwill and more for influence. Senators, investors, and CEOs filled the ballroom, their conversations layered with strategy rather than sincerity. For Victor, it was another opportunity to solidify his image. For Maya, it was another night of polished smiles. She wore a gown Victor had chosen. Her jewelry matched his cufflinks. Even her hairstyle had been approved hours earlier. To the cameras, she was his perfect bride. To herself, she was a ghost moving through velvet curtains and marble floors. Halfway through the evening, she excused herself, claiming she needed fresh air. She stepped into a quiet hallway lined with portraits of donors. For the first time all night, she exhaled without forcing the shape of a smile. That's when it happened. A man approached from the opposite end of the corridor. Tall, younger than Victor, his presence far less calculated. His name was David Carr, a mid-level investor from New York who had business ties to Victor but little personal connection. He wasn't looking for her. He was simply walking past when he noticed something unusual, the way she carried herself. To most guests, Maya was flawless. But David saw the tension in her shoulders, the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her smile didn't quite meet her gaze. As they passed each other, Maya whispered two words so quietly he almost thought he imagined them. "Help me." She didn't break stride. She didn't look back. Her expression never shifted. But the words landed heavy in David's chest. Voiceover, in the language of survival, sometimes a whisper is louder than a scream. David thought about it all night. He saw her again later in the ballroom, standing beside Victor, smiling as though nothing had happened. But the whisper replayed in his mind. "Help me." He wasn't sure what it meant, whether it was literal, metaphorical, or even meant for him at all. But he couldn't ignore it. Over the following weeks, David positioned himself carefully. At another event, he made sure to cross paths with Maya again. This time, he kept his words just as quiet. "I can get you out," he murmured as they passed in a crowded gallery. She didn't nod. She didn't smile. But as her hand brushed against his, her fingers pressed ever so slightly, a silent acknowledgement. From that moment, a fragile alliance was born. David reached out through discreet channels, contacting people who could help without drawing Victor's attention. He had ties in government, acquaintances in security. Every step had to be careful. Victor's influence was vast, and any hint of betrayal could close the cage tighter around Maya. For her part, Maya began preparing silently. She hid her fear behind practiced smiles, her hope behind still eyes. Every day with Victor felt longer, every rule heavier, but for the first time, she had something he couldn't control, the thought of escape. Voiceover builds suspense. For months, Maya had believed there was no way out. But in a single whisper, the possibility returned. Freedom wasn't yet in her hands, but it was back in her mind. And that changed everything. The risk was enormous. If Victor discovered her plan, the consequences would be immediate and severe. Maya knew this. David knew it too. But the alternative, continuing in silence, felt worse. Together, they crafted a plan. Not in long conversations, but in fragments, passing notes that looked like napkins, brief exchanges masked by small talk, signals disguised as chance gestures. To anyone watching, it looked like polite acquaintance. To them, it was survival strategy. The hardest part wasn't the planning. It was the waiting. Every day, Maya woke up unsure if she would ever see it through. Every night, she went to sleep wondering if tomorrow would bring discovery instead of freedom. Her body continued to weaken. The headaches, the nausea, the weight loss, it all compounded. Yet, in the midst of it, she found strength in something new, the knowledge that she wasn't completely alone anymore. By December, the plan was real. David secured a narrow window of opportunity during one of Victor's business trips. It would be dangerous, timed to the hour, relying on forged documents and discreet travel. For Maya, the idea of slipping past the walls that had caged her was terrifying. But it was also her only chance. Escape is never a single moment. It's a chain of decisions, each one more dangerous than the last. For Maya Brooks, that chain reached its breaking point in early 2022. The plan was fragile, held together by timing and trust. David Carr, the businessman who had heard her whisper, had secured forged travel documents and coordinated with contacts who owed him favors. But even he knew, if Victor Hale discovered a single detail, the plan would collapse. The opportunity came on a Thursday morning. Victor had hosted a late-night gathering the evening before, one of his endless cycles of investors and politicians. He would sleep late, leaving a thin window of time when the eyes watching Maya were fewer, less alert. At dawn, David met her at a predetermined location, an underground parking garage 3 blocks from the penthouse. Maya's heart pounded as she slid into the back seat of a nondescript sedan. Every shadow felt like a guard. Every passing pedestrian looked like an informant. David didn't waste time. "We have one shot," he said quietly. "You have to stay calm." Their destination was the airport. Not the bustling commercial terminals but a smaller, private facility where security was strict in a different way. Here, Victor's reach was long, but anonymity could work in their favor. The tension peaked at the checkpoint. A guard scanned Maya's documents, his eyes flicking between the paper and her face. Her palms dampened, her knees weak. The silence stretched too long. He reached for his radio. Maya felt her breath seize. But then, just as quickly, he stamped the documents and handed them back. David exhaled only once they were inside the terminal. Maya didn't exhale until the wheels of the plane lifted from the runway. For the first time in months, she wept, not from fear, but from relief. Voiceover, every survivor will tell you, escape isn't freedom. It's only the first step toward it. For Maya Brooks, freedom began 30,000 feet above the ground, on a plane carrying her back to a life she thought she had lost forever. Back in the United States, Maya was admitted directly into a hospital in Atlanta. The records show recurring fevers, rapid weight loss, and signs of long-term stress. But what no chart could capture was the toll of isolation, humiliation, and control. Nurses described her as polite, quiet, but haunted. She often stared at the ceiling for long stretches, as though waiting for the sound of footsteps that never came. Her mother, Denise, visited daily. For months she had worried in silence, cut off from her daughter by Victor's walls. Now, seeing Maya in a hospital gown rather than a designer dress, she felt both heartbreak and relief. Heartbreak for what her daughter had endured. Relief that she was alive to tell it. Meanwhile, David Carr's role became public knowledge. Whispers turned into headlines. Investor helps woman escape Tycoon's control. Some hailed him as a hero. Others questioned his motives. But David remained steady, refusing to make himself the center of the story. "It's not about me," he told a reporter. "It's about her." And what of Victor Hale? Here is where the story bends into the frustrating reality of power. Despite Maya's escape, despite her testimony, Victor remained untouched in the immediate aftermath. His lawyers deflected accusations, his publicists buried rumors, his wealth insulated him. To the outside world, he continued to host galas, fund political campaigns, and cut business deals. But cracks had formed. For the first time, journalists began digging deeper. They interviewed women who had once been seen at Victor's side but later disappeared from public view. They uncovered a pattern, not always criminal by legal definition, but deeply troubling. Isolation. Control. Silence. The investigation was slow, hindered by money and influence. But the fact that questions were being asked at all was a small victory. Voiceover: in true crime, resolution rarely looks like justice. More often, it looks like survival. And in Maya's case, survival was the first form of justice she could claim for herself. As winter turned to spring, Maya began the long process of healing. Therapy sessions, medical treatments, quiet walks with her mother. She deleted old social media accounts, unwilling to let curated lies define her anymore. She declined interviews, choosing instead to speak privately with advocates who understood the weight of coercive control. In time, she found her voice again. Not in press conferences or TV specials, but in support groups, where women shared stories that sounded too much like her own. Each time she spoke, the cage loosened a little more. But even as she healed, the larger question lingered: why was Victor Hale still free? Why did men like him so often escape accountability? The answer, of course, was money. His wealth bought silence, his influence bought hesitation, and his reputation bought doubt. For every whisper of truth, there was a louder echo of denial. Yet, the story was no longer his alone. By escaping, by surviving, Maya had reclaimed part of the narrative. And once a narrative escapes into the public, it's harder to bury. For every crime story, there comes a final chapter, not always a courtroom, not always a verdict, but always a reckoning. For Maya Brooks, that reckoning was not about Victor Hale. It was about herself. Months after her escape, the evidence of what she endured still lingered. The hospital stay gave way to therapy sessions, first every week, then every month. The physical toll began to fade, her strength slowly returned, her appetite came back, but the invisible wounds were harder to heal. Trust, dignity, confidence, those were not restored overnight. And yet, survival itself was proof of her resilience. Maya did not return to the curated life she once displayed online. The designer clothes, the champagne toasts, the luxury photos, they were gone. In their place came simplicity. Walks with her mother. Quiet mornings in Atlanta parks. A notebook filled with her own words, not captions for the approval of strangers. She avoided interviews at first. Journalists wanted headlines, not healing. But in time, she agreed to share her story, not in tabloids, but with organizations that helped women escape coercive control. Her voice, once silent, became a source of warning. Luxury, she told one group, is not freedom if someone else holds the key to the door. No amount of wealth is worth your voice. Meanwhile, the world around her kept moving. Evan Collins, her former boyfriend, had built a quieter life of his own. By 2022, he was engaged to a nurse, a woman steady and kind, someone who represented the safety Maya had once overlooked. When word reached him that Maya was safe, he felt relief, not regret. They would never return to what they once had, but her survival mattered more than any unfinished story between them. David Carr, the man who risked his reputation to help her, remained a friend. He refused credit, refused praise. She saved herself, he said in every interview. I just listened when she asked. And Victor Hale? For him, the story was unfinished. He continued to move in circles of influence, shielded by money and silence. Investigations into his conduct began, slowed by lawyers, delayed by technicalities. No conviction came quickly. In the world of power, justice rarely moves at the speed of survival. But cracks had formed. Investors whispered doubts. Politicians hesitated to be photographed at his side. Journalists dug deeper. One by one, the whispers grew louder. His empire still stood, but it no longer looked untouchable. Voiceover: for Maya Brooks, victory wasn't measured in whether Victor Hale faced charges. It was measured in every morning she woke up and chose her own day. Survival itself was her verdict. By the fall of 2022, Maya stood before a crowd at a renovated community center in Atlanta. She wasn't there as a celebrity, but as a survivor. The center had invited her to speak about resilience, about the hidden dangers of coercive control, about the price of mistaking wealth for freedom. She took the stage slowly, her voice quiet but steady. I thought freedom meant money. I thought power meant luxury. But what I learned is this: freedom is the ability to walk outside when you want to call your mother when you need to know that no one owns your decisions but you. That's what freedom really is. The room was silent, listening. And then the applause came, not for the glamour she once displayed, but for the truth she now spoke. Her story spread not through tabloids, but through survivor networks. Her warning became a lesson: luxury can be a cage, silence can be a weapon, and sometimes the most dangerous criminals are the ones who never raise their voices. And still, she carried the question with her: why do men like Victor Hale so often remain free? The answer was complicated: power, money, silence. But Maya also knew that every voice raised against him weakened his grip. Her survival, her testimony, her courage, it was all part of that resistance. Voiceover builds to close. True crime stories don't always end with handcuffs. Sometimes they end with survival. Sometimes they end with silence breaking. And sometimes they end with one woman standing on a stage, telling the truth about what she endured, so the next woman might recognize the warning signs before it's too late. In the end, Maya Brooks' story was not about gold digging, or glamour, or even Victor Hale. It was about the cost of freedom, and the courage to reclaim it. So, if you were offered the world, the cars, the mansions, the diamonds, but at the cost of your voice, your choices, your freedom, would you take it? Or would you walk away with nothing but yourself?